Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, Kim Jong-un. I have had long ambition to present Sputnik, to go into outer space and have cheese sandwich with good friend, Donald Trump. Oh no, you don't, Kim. You've already got a career in Korea. I'm Neil Clarke and I am presenting Sputnik for George Galloway and Gayatri. Morocco has long prided itself on being one of the most stable countries in North Africa, a place where the so-called Arab Spring didn't turn into an Arab winter. But since October, there's been a big increase in tensions as anti-government protests have swept the country. The authorities have responded with a carrot and stick approach. As in the film Casablanca, the usual suspects, including the leader of the protest movement, and many others too, have been arrested. But at King Mohammed's behest, there's also been promises by the government to increase infrastructure spending and improve the economy. Will the concessions be enough to quell the discontent, or is Morocco heading for a genuine people's revolution? Joining me now to discuss the events there is the analyst, Dr. Riaz Karim. Dr. Karim, very warm welcome on board the Sputnik.
Thank you.
So can you give us the background to these disturbances, these protests in Morocco? When did they actually really start in earnest?
Well, in earnest, really, they started in 1958.
Okay.
When the late King Hassan II was in power. A similar thing happened in the Rif Mountains with the same people.
Okay.
And his way of dealing it was he sent thousands of troops to go and quell the uprising.
Right.
At that time. And their demand was the very same then as it is now. It is because the region is underrepresented and they didn't, and underdeveloped.
This is in the north of Morocco,
yes,
yeah, the Rif region.
The Rif region. They were underrepresented in Rabat in the government, and they're underdeveloped ever since.
Right.
And at that time it was quelled, but then again, as Mohsin Fikri, the fisherman,
right,
he was basically just selling swordfish, which happened to be out of season. And what they did was the police came in, harassed him, took his fish away, and threw it in the garbage truck. And it was his only way of livelihood. So what he did was he actually jumped into the garbage truck to go retrieve the fish.
Okay.
And as he did that, one of the drivers actually pressed the switch on the compactor.
And he was killed.
And he was crushed and killed.
Right.
And that is very similar to what happened to Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia.
Exactly, yeah.
Which actually started the Arab Springs in 2011. And this was the cause of this uprising. And now it is getting to a point where the government actually literally has to pay attention to the Rif.
Because it has spread, hasn't it, all over the country.
Yes, it
Casablanca.
Has. Yeah, now there are
and
protests.
Other cities.
Yeah, there are protests in Rabat, in Casablanca, I believe in Tangiers and in Nerod already. And there is a heavy police presence as well. The guy who actually started this, his name is Nasser Zefzafi. Zefzafi is a 39-year-old out-of-work guy, not very educated.
Okay.
He sort of became the de facto leader
of the protest movement,
the protest movement, which is called Al-Hirak, I believe. They were trying to find a way to arrest him, but he was on the run. And then he went into a mosque where, where one of the preachers was preaching. And he went directly onto the microphone and said, was this mosque made for praying or for the leaders? And that gave him a cause, and basically he was arrested for impeding the freedom of religion.
Okay, and he's still in jail today, is he?
Yes, he's in jail, and about 70 of his followers are still in jail, though the media in Morocco reports about 24.
Okay.
But then the media in Morocco is heavily controlled by the government, so you know that you have to take that into account.
Now, at the King's behest, I know that the government has offered the carrot, hasn't it? It said that there's going to be pumping millions of dirhams into infrastructure projects in the north and economic reform. Is that likely to happen? Is that just sort of?
Well, you know, King Mohammed VI is actually a very progressive guy. You know, I wouldn't say he's a bad guy because he's, you know, when you go to Morocco, you will see what is done to that country. But at the same time, politics is politics. You know, there's no two ways about it. He is not going to repeat what his father did.
Not send the troops in.
Yes, send the troops in, because he sent a very high-powered delegation with a lot of ministers to go into the area and sit down with these people, with a couple of parties over there.
Right.
And they issued a joint statement saying that, you know, the government is going to look after their needs now. But it is a question of too little, too late. These people have been protesting since years now, and nothing has happened. There's a lot of lip service going on that there's going to be, you know, you're going to have this development, you're going to have that development, people are going to have jobs, you know, and these guys are just protesting about their freedom and social justice and dignity. That's all they want. It is not a revolution per se.
Right, so but no one's calling for the king to step down or anything like that.
Exactly. You know, they have very simple demands. Treat us like you treat everybody else.
And there is a divide in Morocco, isn't there, between the big cities like Rabat and the areas in the north that haven't had the economic progress that perhaps other regions have. Yeah,
there is, and especially when you talk about the Berber people.
Right.
The Berber people are. You know, the word Berber first comes from the Roman word barbarian. So they're known fighters. You know, and when Morocco was fighting for its independence from France, the elite were too busy schmoozing the French while the Berber were actually fighting for independence. So they have a stake in the country. You know, and that is the reason why when Zefzafi was arrested, and 70 of his followers were arrested, 600 lawyers came out and registered to provide free services and defend them in courts.
Wow, that's quite impressive.
Yeah, and so, you know, and the government has actually asked Zefzafi to sit on a table with them and try to, you know, try to sort the situation out, but he still refuses.
Well, the Arab Spring did hit Morocco, didn't it, in 2011? We had the February the 20th movement, but it went in a different direction, didn't it, from elsewhere?
Yeah, Morocco's been very progressive that way. That's why I said, you know, this king is a very smart chap. He is. And, you know, he controlled that, so it actually didn't hit home.
He did concede quite a few reforms.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. And this is the reason why Morocco is where it is right now, because he is open to ideas. He's progressive. So, you know, when he says he's going to do something, he probably will do it. But the problem is that the government in Rabat is so far away from these areas that, you know, once it is kind of like out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. Unless you know, reminders like this happen to let the government in Rabat know that, okay, we're still here and we haven't gotten anything as yet, as you promised. Devolution perhaps could be a solution, couldn't it? Or devolving powers to the north. Yeah, it could. Economic. It could, and in some sorts it is there. The problem is, see, one of the biggest problems with Arabic countries is the power that the police yield. They have way too much power in their hands. For example, if you take you know, the example of Saudi Arabia, they have the Sharia police. Yeah. You know, those people are allowed to do anything and everything. You know, including taking people and just throwing them on the road. You know, the police in the Rif region are doing exactly the same. Okay. They, there was a protest which was actually started by Zafzafi's mother, and a lot of women went to this protest. And the police actually made a wall around them and did not let Zafzafi's mother come into the protest at all. And so the police have a lot of powers.
Are they a law unto themselves? I mean, is it the government telling them to do this, do you think, or is it just the...
No, it is the government telling them to do this.
Yes.
They can't do that on their own. I think it is the government telling them what to do. Because now they have him, it's going to be tough for them to release him, even though they're talking about concessions and reforms and everything. But, you know, politics is politics. So
how will this pan out, do you think? Just briefly, do you think that this will have a generally peaceful solution as before in Morocco? Or do you think there is a danger that it could escalate, and if the concessions aren't made and aren't carried out?
I think there is going to be a peaceful resolution to this. But the downside of it is that there's a couple of parties over there in the Rif region who have sided with the government already and have issued a joint communique about sitting down with the government and the government offering all these concessions to them. But that's nothing to do with Al-Hirak. Now, these parties, in absence of Zafzafi, these parties are the ones that are going to benefit. You know, they will go on with the government, and then they will try to quell this situation and say the government is doing this, the government is doing this, and we're looking after you, and it will die down, but not permanently. Because there's always another Zafzafi in the wings somewhere. That's going to come out and do it again.
Well, Dr. Karim, thank you so much for shedding some light on the events in Morocco for us on the Sputnik.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Don't go away, because after the break, we'll be lifting the lid on who really rules the world. Welcome back to Sputnik with me, Neil Clarke, standing in for my good friends George and Gatry. We live in a world where just 8 people, yes, 8 people, own half the world's wealth. A free market accident? Well, according to the former Financial Times journalist turned rogue reporter Matt Kennard, it's all by design. Matt, a very warm welcome on board the Sputnik.
Thanks for having me.
Your book, The Racket, is absolutely brilliant, absolutely sensational. You basically reveal, don't you, how the world works.
Well, I tried to. I mean, I was at the Financial Times for 2.5 years. And went there after studying in the United States. My CV was good. I mean, that's how I got into the Financial Times. But I always had a critical mind when I went there. So I used my time there pretty consciously to uncover and ask questions about issues that most people at the Financial Times just don't ask because they don't think these things. So I traveled the world. I spoke to people across Latin America, Africa, Asia, and really started to understand just who really has the power in our world. And it's not the politicians on our screens, really. Most of them are puppets for another force, which is finance capital.
Yeah, and these are the racketeers.
Exactly.
Phrase, yeah.
And no, I was going to say, and it basically does run like a mafia. So you have a whole system set up, which is development banks, the IMF, the World Bank, obviously hedge funds, banks that loan to different businesses and people, and all these people have construct ideology to legitimate what they do to the world. So most people don't understand how the world really works because they're fed all this nonsense, this ideology about how free market capitalism is all to alleviate poverty. If you read the World Bank's literature, their fundamental goal is to alleviate poverty, which is hilarious, really, because they are the main agents of stopping that happening. And what is really interesting to look at how the world works is really what happens when there's a fly in the ointment, and that's what I really looked at in the book. I looked extensively at Bolivia, where there was the rise of Evo Morales in 2005, who is this former coca picker who was a trade unionist and rose and became the first indigenous president in the country's history and in Latin America's history. And he really came under sustained attack from the United States government and all the different agencies that work for them. So I'm talking about that.
You talk about the acronyms in the book, don't you?
Exactly. There's tons of, exactly. And it's very hard to piece together because the way the system works is so beautiful in a way because because it's very hard to pin them down at any particular points. You have to. That's why someone like Morales found it very hard when he first came in to really know where he was under attack from, because obviously the CIA don't publicise their programs. US aid is meant to be this really beneficent institution in this country, and they have tons of money. So, but eventually he started kicking them out. So he kicked out US aid, he kicked out the Drug Enforcement Administration, and he liberated his country. And that is what you have to do. There's a famous Hugo Chavez quote where someone asked him, why are you so anti-American? And he said, you know what, I would love to get on well with America, but if you want to do what I want to do, you can't get on with America because you step on the toes of the empire, and the empire knows where its interests are and knows people who are not going to help them enforce it. People like Chavez, people like Morales, people like Corbyn. I mean, it's happening across the world that this system has run well enough for a time in the neoliberal period for these people, but increasingly people are waking up and electing leaders that really are challenging the fundamentals of this system.
Yeah, and you describe an intricate web, don't you, of control by this global financial elite through these various agencies to get their way, and the pressures that are put on governments. Which
exactly, and governments, the funny thing that I found when I was doing my reporting is in most countries in the world, governments aren't there to represent the people they are meant to represent. What they are there for is to be mediators between financial capital and corporations and the resources in their country. So you have, Haiti, for example, for hundreds of years was ruled by the French and then the United States, and was basically just a playground for finance capital. When someone like Aristide came in, immediately he wanted to nationalise and do some. It wasn't even that radical, but he was radical enough that the United States spirited him out of the country twice. So that's what happens. That's how the system works. It's an intricate web that lives below the surface, and you hardly ever see it working in its real awful way that it works, because we don't have a media which tells people. But every now and then you do sort of, it does expose itself.
And the role of the media. I mean, obviously you're right in the heart of it, working for the FT, and you put something very interesting. I remember saying that when you talked about Hosni Mubarak, and you described him in one of your articles as the US-backed dictator. That US-backed was taken out. But then when you put in, I think it was about Hezbollah being Iran-backed, that was kept in. So it's like we're allowed to sometimes say who backs who, but not others.
Right, exactly. And that's what's so interesting about working within the corporate media, is no one's telling you not to say that. No one's saying don't say US-backed Hosni Mubarak. But because you've been socialised so intensely while you're there, you just don't think these things. And I remember writing it. I had a critical mind going in, so I could still carry on doing it, and I wasn't particularly I didn't care about the career there. But if I had, I wouldn't have even bothered doing that, or wouldn't have even thought those things. So, but as soon as I actually thought that was quite funny, because I thought I might as well try it. I know I'm leaving, and they did take it out.
They take it out, yeah.
So that's a very explicit way of understanding how the system operates. And of course, as we're talking about, a racket, a financial elite, which basically steals from the rest from the poor world every day. When you're talking about that, you need a massive ideological system on top of it to make people not understand it, and to make people ignorant of how it really works. Because if people understood, then they wouldn't be able to do what they get away with. It just wouldn't happen.
You also mentioned in the book, you said that when real democracies are the ones we look down at and the ones we sneer at in the West.
And that's just because we have all the narratives which are driven in our society by the media are elite narratives. If you look at the demographics of people in the media, they're all private school educated, white, went probably the same schools, and that has the milieu effect has a massive effect. People just all think the same sort of things. So when they don't understand Bolivia. Most of the people would never have been there, wouldn't know anything about the politics. So they'll just read some column in the Wall Street Journal saying Evo Morales is a narco-terrorist, and that's it. So, but when you go there and you start understanding that it's actually one of the most democratic societies in the world, then it really flips that all around.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Hugo Chavez was demonised as a dictator, wasn't he? He always routinely called a dictator, yet he won how many elections or how many referenda, 13 or whatever?
Exactly.
And yet Suharto, by contrast, in Indonesia, who had, genocidist in East Timor, etc., was never called that, or rarely called that.
You can really correlate how a leader is treated in the developing, what's called the global south now, by how nice they are to international capital. So the really interesting case in Latin America is Lula in Brazil, who I like a lot and was a trade unionist, and did many good things in Brazil, but he was not as radical as Morales or Chavez. He didn't really go in for the nationalizations in a big way. He didn't really touch the money that was already accumulated in the 1% in Brazil. He just sort of dispersed it a bit better. And obviously the international media loved him. He was like the darling of the New York Times. And you can really correlate that in all ways. Really, a leader becomes more and more demonized the more they have a sort of adversarial opinion of financial capital.
Yes.
That's just how it works. And it's squeezed, and then you get the whole propaganda war of where, I mean, in Venezuela now they're accusing, the Americans are accusing close associates of Maduro of being narco traffickers, and all this stuff comes out again and again. They did it in Panama. I mean, it's all the same sort of propaganda is put out just to destroy anyone who lifts a finger against the system running as it should.
And for your book, you interview a wide range of people, didn't you, including Henry Kissinger?
Well, I didn't interview him. I was a student at Columbia University in New York. And in fact, it's quite an interesting story because it really shows how docile the elite media is. Now, Columbia University in New York, the journalism school there is meant to be the best in the world. And Henry Kissinger came, and we had the journalism students there asking things like, what's your favorite color? What do you think of the human rights situation in China? Which is a fair question to someone who's not a war criminal who's murdered millions of people in East Asia and other places. So I sort of thought, well, I'm not going to be happy with myself unless I just sort of break up this love fest. So I just said to him, how do you sleep at night? And he said, and he sort of, everyone sort of was shocked and looked around, and he said in his funny voice, how do you substantiate that? And I sort of went on about East Timor. Yeah, exactly. I don't have all day. Yeah, exactly. But East Timor, Bangladesh, Chile, and then he just, a journalism professor got up and stood next to him and sort of made it clear that I should shut up. So anyway, I guess we could call that an interview, but it was more confrontation. I mean, yeah, I did. The great thing about the Financial Times and what I wanted to use it for was the access you get. The access you get is incredible. I was in Washington, D.C. for 6 months and also in New York as well. And I had access to all the top people on Wall Street, all the politicians that I wanted to speak to in Washington, D.C. And it's an amazing resource. I'll never have it again. So I was very conscious that I should use it to ask questions that aren't asked usually and to really sort of understand the system from within, which is very hard to do. There's many good analysts who write about the system from without, and I'm going to be doing that for the rest of my life now, but I thought I should use this opportunity while I can to do that.
Because it is dismissed, isn't it, sometimes as a conspiracy theory. When we talk about, you know, financial elites, we have the gatekeepers come along and say that's just conspiracy theories. We have democracies, we have freedom, and this is just sort of left-wing nonsense, isn't it?
But it's a funny thing, the conspiracy theory thing, because when a right-wing newspaper talks about a teachers' union wanting better wages for their teachers, no one calls that a conspiracy theory. And it's true, but people get together and look out for their interests. Teachers obviously are looking for better wages through their union. But if you start saying the 1% who own all the wealth of our world actually have some sort of consciousness about retaining that wealth and increasing it, then you're a conspiracy theorist.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's a conspiracy theory.
Ludicrous idea.
Apparently the richest people in our society don't have any sort of strategic view of how to make that money increase. So I think that conspiracy theories is one of the many ways that critical journalists, critical minds are marginalized. And that's another thing that I learned at the FT, is that there's very powerful ways of stopping anyone with a critical mind climbing the ladder of the mainstream media. You just can't. And I understand.
You get branded, don't you?
You get branded, and there's words like I was called a maverick, and all these sort of patronizing terms that sort of make you, and it's very hard to go into work for 10, 20 years and feel completely at odds with everyone around you and be called those names. So most people just leave, and I don't. Go on.
The pressure to conform is enormous, isn't it?
Huge, and that's how all power systems work. They work by creating a new generation of people that are going to support the same system. Otherwise, they would disintegrate very fast. So and what's quite funny is people get very arrogant. So people sit atop the mainstream media in the UK and work for Murdoch and people like that, and then talk to people, I don't know, people who work for RT and others, and say, oh, you're just working for a state propaganda outlet. And they don't think it's weird. They don't think it's weird that they work for an Australian oligarch who has much more extreme politics than a lot of the people on here. It's just they can't see that in some ways they're looking in the mirror, but for them they're completely free. And in a sense they are free, because they can say what they like because Rupert Murdoch likes what they say. So and that's how the media works.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the Sputnik today. All the very best to you.
Thanks.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for on the Sputnik this week. I've been Neil Clarke, standing in for George and Gatry, and as George would say, it's been marvellous.